The waitress sang a forgotten vampire prayer to calm a child's tears during the dinner rush. The vampire king froze mid-sentence across the restaurant, his council going silent around him. Everyone thought it was just an old song, but he knew it was the binding rite his mother sang before she was executed. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. Mira Chen had stopped noticing the fluorescent hum overhead hours ago, the way you stop noticing your own heartbeat when you've worked the dinner rush at your grandmother's diner for the 3,000th time. But the sound came back sharp and insistent when the kid at table 4 started wailing like his world was ending over a dropped French fry. She was bone-tired, the kind of exhausted that lived in your lower back and behind your eyes, 2 double shifts this week already and rent still short. Eviction notice crumpled in her apron pocket, like a talisman of failure. But the mom looked worse. That special kind of frayed that came from being alone with a small child in public while everyone pretended not to judge. Mira grabbed a replacement order of fries from the kitchen window and slid into the booth across from them without asking, ignoring the other tables snapping fingers for refills, and the kid kept sobbing, hiccuping, face red and wet. The mom mouthed sorry, and Mira waved it off. Then did something she hadn't done in the 2 years since Nana died. Something that felt like opening a door she'd kept locked because the room behind it hurt too much. She started singing, soft and low, the lullaby Nana used to hum when Mira couldn't sleep as a child. The one with the strange consonants that caught in your throat, like you were speaking a language your mouth didn't quite remember, words that sounded like Velesh dan Corvesh, Talahan sen moriv. The kid stopped crying mid-sob, eyes going wide and wet, and Mira kept singing, one hand on the table between them, not touching but close, maternal warmth rising in her chest, even though she'd never had kids, never even been close. The diner noise faded to background hum, just her voice and the child's breathing evening out, and she got to the end of the verse before she registered the silence spreading from the corner booth like spilled water. When she looked up, the man in the expensive charcoal suit was standing 3 feet away, and her first stupid thought was that he was beautiful in a way that made you forget to breathe. All sharp cheekbones and pale skin, and eyes so dark they looked black in the diner's flat lighting. Her second thought was that something was very wrong, because he'd gone white as paper, one hand gripping the edge of the booth hard enough that his knuckles matched, and the 3 people still seated in the shadows behind him had gone absolutely still in a way that reminded her of deer before they bolted. His voice when he spoke was rough, accent she couldn't place. British, maybe, or older than that. And it cut through every conversation in the diner like a blade. "Where did you learn that?" Not a question, a demand, and Mira felt her pulse kick into her throat because this was wrong. Everything about him was wrong, the way he stood too still, the way the air around him felt cold even from 3 feet away, the way everyone in the diner was suddenly not looking at them with the studied intensity of people trying very hard not to get involved. She stood up fast, hit her hip on the table corner, barely felt it. "It's just an old song," she said, and hated how her voice shook. "My Nana used to sing it when I couldn't sleep." The man's jaw worked like he was trying to swallow glass. "That is not a song," he said, quieter now but somehow worse. "That is the rite of blood compassion. It was outlawed in 1624. Mira laughed, couldn't help it. The kind of high nervous sound that came out when your brain couldn't process what it was hearing. "You're insane," she said, but she was already backing up, already calculating the distance to the kitchen, to the back door, to anywhere that wasn't within reach of this beautiful, terrifying stranger who knew things about her grandmother's lullaby that made no sense. Behind him, one of the seated men, older, silver-haired, stood smoothly and spoke in a voice like winter frost. "My king, perhaps this conversation should continue elsewhere. We have protocols." But the dark-eyed man didn't look away from Mira, didn't even blink, and when he spoke again it was almost gentle. The protocols can wait. Then, harder. Your grandmother's name. Now. Mira's mouth was dry, heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth, and some instinct she didn't recognize told her that lying would be worse than whatever truth she was stumbling into. Helena, she said. Helena Kovac. She died 2 years ago, and she didn't. It was just a song. The man made a sound like he'd been punched, one hand coming up to cover his mouth, and for a second, Mira thought he might actually fall. The silver-haired man, Thorn, she heard someone mutter behind her, moved forward, but stopped when the dark-eyed man held up one hand. Behind them, the corner booth was abandoned, wine glasses sitting untouched, and Mira registered details she'd been too busy to notice before. The way that booth was always reserved even on busy nights. The way the people who sat there never ordered food, never stayed past dark, never quite looked like they belonged in her grandmother's run-down diner with its cracked vinyl and coffee rings on the laminate. November rain streaked the front windows, headlights smearing past outside, and the whole diner felt like it was holding its breath. The mom with the kid was staring openly now, the child quiet in her lap, and Mira wanted to tell them to leave, to run, but her tongue felt stuck to the roof of her mouth. The dark-eyed man, this king apparently, straightened slowly, and when he looked at her again his face had gone carefully blank, all that raw emotion locked away behind something that looked like it had taken lifetimes to build. "We need to talk," he said, "somewhere private," and every nerve in Mira's body screamed run, but her feet stayed planted, because underneath the fear was something else. Something that felt like recognition, like the echo of her grandmother's voice in the melody she'd just sung, like a door opening onto a room she'd been walking past her whole life without knowing it was there. The silver-haired man, Thorn, pulled out his phone with a smooth, practiced motion that made Mira think of executives in boardrooms and people who made problems disappear, and she saw him type something quick before sliding it back into his jacket. The dark-eyed man was still watching her, waiting, and there was something desperate in the set of his shoulders that didn't match the careful control of his expression. "Please," he said, and the word sounded like it cost him. "I knew Helena. I knew her a very long time ago, and if you're singing what I think you're singing, then you're in more danger than you can possibly understand." Mira's hand found her apron pocket, fingers closing on the eviction notice there, 72 hours to vacate, and she thought about her studio apartment with its broken radiator and water-stained ceiling, about the diner that was all she had left of Nana, about the life she'd built out of nothing that was falling apart one bill at a time. Danger felt abstract compared to the concrete weight of failure, and maybe that's why she heard herself say, "Okay," even as her brain screamed that this was the worst decision she'd ever make, that you didn't follow strange, beautiful men who talked about 16th century laws and looked at you like you were a ghost. The man's shoulders dropped half an inch, relief flickering across his face before the mask came back. "My name is Alexander," he said, "and your grandmother saved my mother's life a long time ago, in a way I thought had been forgotten." Behind him, Thorn made a soft disapproving sound, and Alexander's head turned just slightly, not looking away from Mira, but acknowledging the other man's presence. "We're leaving," he said, and it wasn't a suggestion. The three other people in the corner booth rose as one, smooth and synchronized in a way that made Mira's skin crawl, and she watched them file toward the door, Thorn last, his pale eyes on her like he was memorizing her face for later. When they were gone, Alexander gestured to the now empty booth, an invitation, and Mira looked around the diner, at the customers suddenly very interested in their plates, at the cook visible through the kitchen window carefully not watching. She should tell them to call the police, should scream, should do anything except slide into that booth across from a man who made the air feel colder just by standing in it. But she thought about Nana singing her to sleep, About the way the melody always made her feel safe, even when nothing else did. About the slight accent Nana never lost even after 60 years in America. And she walked to the booth on legs that felt like water, and sat down in cracked red vinyl that suddenly felt like the edge of a cliff. The diner emptied fast once Alexander said, "Leave us," in that voice that wasn't loud but somehow filled every corner of the room, customers suddenly remembering they had places to be, the cook shutting down the grill without being asked, and within 10 minutes, Mira was alone with a man who claimed to be a vampire king sitting across from her in a booth that suddenly felt very small. He didn't move like normal people moved, she realized, too still when he was still, too fluid when he shifted. And the longer she looked at him, the more details clicked wrong. The way his chest didn't rise and fall with breath, the way his skin had that porcelain quality you saw on expensive dolls, beautiful and utterly lifeless. He folded his hands on the table between them, long fingers laced together, and started talking in that accent she still couldn't place, British underneath something older, telling her about protection pacts between vampires and humans that dated back centuries, binding rites sung in blood and witnessed under moonlight, his mother Katerina, who believed the two species could coexist as partners instead of predator and prey. The old council executed her for it in 1624, he said, voice flat like he was reciting history instead of talking about watching his mother die, and they outlawed the practice, made it treason to even speak the rites aloud. No human outside the bloodline should know those words, he said, looking at her with eyes that were definitely too dark, no variation between iris and pupil. No human should be able to sing the rite of blood compassion unless they were taught by someone who remembered, and everyone who remembered is dead. Mira's hands were shaking, so she shoved them under the table, pressed them against her thighs. "This is insane," she said. "You're telling me my grandmother was what, involved in vampire politics 400 years ago? That's not possible. She was born in 1936. I saw her birth certificate." Alexander's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Grief maybe, or recognition. "Show me a picture," he said, "of Helena." And Mira almost said no, almost got up and walked out, but her hand was already reaching for her phone, fingers finding the photo she kept as her lock screen. Nana at 70-something smiling in the diner, flour on her apron, the same diner Mira worked now. She turned the phone around and watched Alexander go absolutely still, not breathing still, carved from stone still, and when he reached for the phone his hand trembled just slightly. "Helena," he said, and his voice cracked on the name. She got out. We all thought Thorne's people found her after the execution, but she got out." He looked up at Mira, and his face was doing something complicated. Too many emotions for someone who'd been blank a second ago. "Your grandmother was my mother's companion," he said. "Not servant, not friend, companion in the way that meant everything the old council feared. They were bonded, Katerina and Helena, and when the council came for my mother, Helena was supposed to die with her. Someone smuggled her out the night before, and I spent 2 centuries looking for her, thinking if I could find her I could, I don't know, apologize, explain, something. But there was no trace, and eventually I assumed she'd died somewhere I'd never find." He slid the phone back across the table. "You're her only descendant." Mira felt like the booth was tilting. "She died 2 years ago," she managed. "Cancer. She didn't talk about any of this. She just sang me songs and taught me to cook and told me stories about the old country that never quite made sense." Alexander nodded slowly. "She was protecting you," he said. "By staying hidden, by not teaching you anything except the songs, which she probably hoped you'd never sing in front of anyone who'd recognize them. But you did, and now everything changes. The rite you sang isn't just a lullaby, it's an activated protection oath, and by singing it in my presence, you've invoked an ancient law that predates the council's ban. I am now bound to protect you, whether either of us wants it or not." Mira laughed, high and slightly hysterical. Protect me from what? She said. From everyone who will now see you as leverage against me, Alexander said. And he wasn't smiling. Thorne texted his people the second you started singing. By now, every vampire in Hartford knows the king recognized a human singing the forbidden rite, and they're going to want to know why, and some of them are going to see an opportunity. Mira stood up fast enough that the table rocked. I need to go, she said. I can't. I have a shift tomorrow and rent due, and a life that doesn't include whatever this is. Alexander stood too, slower, and gestured toward the door. Go, he said. But you should know that the protection works both ways. I can't harm you, but you can't run from what's coming. He pulled a card from his jacket, plain white with a phone number in black ink. Nothing else. Call me when you're ready to understand what your grandmother died keeping secret. Then he walked past her toward the back door, the one that led to the alley, and disappeared into the November rain like he'd never been there at all. Mira sat in her car in the diner parking lot with the engine running and the heat on full blast, hands still shaking, staring at the card Alexander had given her like it might explode. The rain had picked up, November cold seeping through the windshield, puddles reflecting streetlights in smears of orange and white, and she kept playing the conversation over in her head. Vampires, protection rights, her grandmother's secret life, trying to find the angle where it made sense, or the moment where she'd slipped into a psychotic break. She was reaching for the gear shift when headlights filled her rearview mirror, too bright, too close, and a sleek black sedan pulled up behind her, blocking her in against the diner's back wall. Her pulse kicked into her throat and she hit the lock button, stupid because locks didn't matter if these were actually vampires, and watched in the mirror as two figures got out. The older one she recognized, silver hair and winter eyes, Thorne from the booth, and the younger one was maybe 30, dark hair, built like he spent serious time in a gym, both of them in suits that probably cost more than her monthly rent. They walked to her driver's side window, not hurrying, and Thorne tapped on the glass with one knuckle, polite as a door-to-door salesman. Mira cracked the window half an inch, cold rain spitting in. The king is sentimental tonight, Thorne said, voice smooth and completely reasonable. Understandable, given the shock of hearing something he thought lost. But sentiment clouds judgment, and I think you'd agree that what you heard in there was overwhelming, possibly frightening. We'd like to make this easier for you. Leave Hartford, forget what you heard, and we'll compensate you generously. Enough to cover your eviction and then some, enough to start over somewhere quieter. The younger one, Marcus, stood slightly behind Thorne, hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Mira's phone buzzed in the cup holder, and she glanced down, saw a text from an unknown number. Don't get in any vehicle but yours. Drive to 1847 Prospect Avenue, now. The cadence was Alexander's, that formal precision, and she looked back up at Thorne. I'm not interested, she said, and was surprised her voice came out steady. Thank you for the offer, but I'm fine. Thorne's smile didn't reach his eyes. I don't think you understand the situation, he said. The king's attention is a dangerous thing. People who attract it tend to have complicated, often short lives. We're offering you a way out while you still have choices. Mira felt anger spike through the fear, hot and bright. I said no, she said, and rolled the window up. Thorne stepped back, still smiling that cold smile, and Marcus pulled out his phone, angled it at her license plate, took a photo. Then they walked back to the sedan, unhurried, and pulled away into the rain, leaving her blocked in by empty parking space and the diner's dumpster. She sat there breathing hard, watching the taillights disappear, then punched the address into her phone's GPS. 12 minutes across town, and every instinct she had screamed this was stupid, that she should drive to the police or her apartment, or literally anywhere, except toward the vampire king, who'd just upended her entire understanding of reality. But Thorne's smile kept replaying in her head, the way he'd said short lives, and she thought about Nana singing her to sleep, about protection oaths and ancient laws, and put the car in gear. The Covenant House at 1847 Prospect Avenue looked like something out of a historical society brochure, Victorian mansion with a wraparound porch and tower windows, lit up against the rain like a museum after hours, too clean and perfect to be real. Mira pulled into the circular driveway, gravel crunching under her tires, and saw Alexander waiting on the front steps, no suit jacket now, just white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, looking younger and somehow more dangerous without the corporate armor. He came down the steps as she parked, moved around to her door as she got out, and his first words were, "Thorn moved faster than I expected. You can't go home tonight." Mira felt the anger from the parking lot come back doubled. "Excuse me," she said. "I have a shift tomorrow at 6 a.m. I have bills due. I have a life. I can't just disappear because you and your council have some kind of vampire Cold War going on." Alexander's jaw tightened. "You have 72 hours before eviction," he said. "I checked. Your landlord received an anonymous offer to buy the building this afternoon, 3 times market value, contingent on all current tenants vacating immediately. That was Thorn. He's removing your safe spaces, making sure you have nowhere to run except to me or to him. And if you go to him, you'll disappear so quietly, no one will ever ask questions." The rain soaked through Mira's jacket, and she felt the weight of the last 3 hours, the last 2 years, the entire exhausting architecture of her life as it collapsed. "What do you want from me?" she said, and hated how tired she sounded. Alexander gestured toward the house. "Safety," he said. "A room, protection, time to figure out what happens next. The cost is everything Helena taught you. Songs, stories, anything she said about the old country or the old ways. I need to know if my mother's work survived, if there's anything left of what she tried to build." Mira looked up at the house, marble steps and leaded glass windows, then back at Alexander standing in the rain like he couldn't feel it. "Why should I trust you?" she said. "You're asking me to give up everything I know for a world I don't understand, with people who've already threatened me because of a grandmother who apparently lied to me my entire life." Alexander met her eyes, and she saw something raw there, under the control. "I can't make you trust me," he said. "I can only tell you that Helena trusted my mother enough to risk execution, and my mother trusted Helena enough to die believing their bond mattered. You're carrying the last piece of that belief, and there are people who will kill to bury it again. Stay tonight, listen to what I know, decide tomorrow if you want to stay or run. But if you run, do it informed." Mira thought about her studio apartment with its broken radiator, about the diner job that barely covered groceries, about Nana's funeral 2 years ago when she'd been the only one there because Helena Kovac had systematically cut ties with everyone who might have known her before. Some protection, she thought. Some beautiful, terrible protection that meant dying alone to keep a secret safe. "Fine," she said, "one night. But tomorrow I'm calling my own shots." Alexander nodded and turned toward the house, and Mira followed him up marble steps into a foyer that smelled like lemon polish and old money, oil paintings of severe-looking people lining the walls, chandelier overhead throwing shadows into corners that felt too deep. Everything beautiful, she thought, everything untouched. Like a museum to a life no one actually lived anymore, and Alexander moved through it like a ghost in his own house, leading her up a curved staircase to a second-floor hallway where he opened a door onto a bedroom bigger than her entire apartment. "You'll be safe here," he said. "No one enters this house without my permission, and I don't give it lightly. There's a library downstairs if you can't sleep, and I'll be awake if you need anything. Vampires don't sleep much." Then he was gone, door clicking shut, and Mira stood in a room with a 4-poster bed, an antique dresser, and windows overlooking a garden she could barely see through the rain, feeling like she'd just walked off the edge of the world into someone else's story, with no idea how the next chapter was supposed to go. Mira woke to November sunlight slanting through unfamiliar windows and spent a confused 30 seconds trying to figure out where she was before the previous night crashed back, vampires and protection rites and her grandmother's secret life, and she sat up in a bed softer than anything she'd ever slept on, feeling like she'd woken up in someone else's body. The guest room looked even more impossible in daylight. Antique furniture that belonged in a museum, cream-colored walls with crown molding, a view of gardens that went on forever. And she was still wearing yesterday's clothes, jeans and diner shirt that smelled like fryer oil and other people's desperation. A knock on the door made her jump, and then Alexander's voice, quiet through the wood, asking if she was awake, if he could come in. She said yes before she could think better of it, and he entered carrying a mug of coffee, steam rising, and the surreal factor jumped another level because he was a vampire king, bringing her breakfast like a concerned roommate. He set the mug on the nightstand, and she saw he'd made it exactly how she took it at the diner: 2 sugars, 1 cream, which meant he'd been watching her more carefully than she'd realized. "I thought you might want this," he said. And in the daylight he looked different, still inhumanly beautiful, but softer somehow. White shirt and dark slacks, hair slightly disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. "I found something last night," he continued, "in the library, something I think you need to see." Mira drank the coffee, letting the warmth ground her, and followed him downstairs through hallways that seemed to multiply, past more oil paintings of severe-faced people who were probably dead vampires, into a room that made her stop in the doorway and stare. The library was 2 stories of dark wood shelves reaching toward a coffered ceiling, rolling ladders on brass rails, leather chairs grouped around reading tables, and books, thousands of books behind glass like they were too precious for air. Thin sunlight filtered through tall windows and caught dust motes drifting, and the whole room smelled like old paper and lemon oil and thyme. Alexander led her to a table where an open wooden box sat, and inside were journals, dozens of them, leather-bound and fragile-looking, pages yellowed at the edges. "Helena's," he said quietly. "I found them last night in a cabinet I locked 200 years ago and forgot about. She must have left them when she fled, hoping someone would find them eventually, or hoping I would." Mira reached out, hesitated, and Alexander nodded permission. She lifted the top journal carefully, opened to a random page, and saw her grandmother's handwriting, younger than she remembered it, but unmistakably Nana's, the looping cursive she'd used for grocery lists and birthday cards. Except this wasn't a grocery list. This was documentation of protection rights, detailed instructions for binding wards, phonetic spellings of the songs Nana used to sing, and at the bottom of the page a note that made Mira's breath catch. Katerina sang the right of eternal protection tonight, the night before her execution. "I will find you in every life," she promised. "I will protect what you protect." I carry her words like a talisman, like a piece of her that the council cannot kill. Mira looked up at Alexander and saw him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "She loved her," Mira said. "Your mother. This wasn't politics." Alexander sat down in the chair across from her, movements slow and deliberate. "No," he said. "It was treason. And it was the bravest thing I've ever witnessed." They read together for what felt like hours, Mira turning pages carefully while Alexander leaned close enough that she could feel the cold radiating off his skin. No body heat, nothing human, but his hands when they steadied a crumbling page were gentle in a way that made her chest hurt. Helena had documented everything: the philosophy behind the protection rights, the belief that vampires and humans were meant to be partners, not predators, recipes for wards that could bind locations, songs for different kinds of oaths. And threaded through it all was the love story, Katerina and Helena meeting in secret, building something the old council would never allow, knowing it would cost them but choosing it anyway. The entry from the night before the execution was the longest, Helena's handwriting shaky in places like she'd been crying while she wrote. Katerina sang the right of eternal protection with her hands in mine and her blood on my lips, traditional witness bond, and she promised that what we built would not die with her, that the protection would pass through bloodlines until someone finished what we started. I do not know if I will survive tomorrow, but I know I carry her promise like a second heartbeat, and if I live, I will make sure her words are not forgotten. Mira felt tears on her face and didn't wipe them away, looking at Alexander and seeing his eyes bright with something that might have been tears if vampires could cry. "You sang the rite of eternal protection," he said quietly, "the one Katerina sang to Helena. By singing it to a child in my presence, you did not just invoke protection, you marked yourself as Helena's heir, and the ancient law is clear about blood heirs. They inherit all bonds, all promises, all debts. My mother vowed to protect what Helena protected, and Helena protected you through her bloodline, which means I am bound to you by an oath that predates the council, predates the ban, predates everything except the fundamental magic that makes the rites work." Mira sat back, overwhelmed. "You don't even know me," she said. "Why would you risk anything for that?" Alexander's smile was sad and certain. "I know you sang to a crying child when you were already exhausted," he said. "I know my mother chose Helena over her own safety. That is enough." The library door banged open and Thorn strode in with 3 other vampires, all of them in dark suits, all of them radiating the kind of cold fury that made the temperature drop. Alexander stood slowly, positioning himself between Mira and the council members, and Thorn's eyes flicked to the journals spread across the table. "This ends now," Thorn said, voice clipped and precise. "Whatever sentimental journey you are on, my king, it ends before you drag us all into chaos." The other council members fanned out, 2 men and a woman, all of them looking at Mira like she was a stain on expensive carpet. One of them, older with a white beard and glasses that looked like an affectation, cleared his throat. "We have come to request that you renounce this supposed bond," he said. "Under current law, you have that right." The human sang words she did not understand, invoking a tradition that has been dead for 4 centuries. "You are not obligated to honor superstition." Alexander's expression went very still, the mask Mira had seen at the diner sliding back into place. "These journals," he said quietly, gesturing to the table, "prove that the old rites predate the council's authority by at least 3 centuries. If I acknowledge the bond publicly, I legitimize the ancient laws, which means the ban itself could be challenged as unconstitutional under our own oldest codes." Thorn took a step forward. "You would destabilize 4 centuries of law for one human girl," he said, and it was not a question. Alexander looked at Mira, held her gaze for 3 long seconds, then turned back to Thorn. "I would destabilize eternity for the chance to finish what my mother started," he said. "Call your vote of no confidence." The room erupted, the woman vampire hissing something in a language Mira did not recognize. The bearded man slamming his hand on a bookshelf hard enough to crack the wood, but Thorn just smiled, cold and triumphant. "You just fractured our unity for sentiment," he said. "The vote will be called for Sunday night, 48 hours from now, and when you lose, you will have destroyed everything you spent 8 centuries building." One of the council members who had stayed silent, a tall vampire with iron-gray hair and a scar across his throat, spoke for the first time. "Some of us remember the old ways," he said quietly. "Some of us think the ban was a mistake." His name was Elder Voss, Mira remembered from the diner, and Thorn turned on him. "You would side with this," he gestured at Mira, "this distraction over centuries of stability." Voss met his gaze calmly. "I would side with law over convenience," he said. "If the ancient rites have legal weight, then we have been ruling unconstitutionally for 400 years, and that is a problem worth addressing." Thorn's control cracked, just for a second, and Mira saw fear underneath the anger. "You have condemned us all," he said to Alexander. "When the vote fails and your enemies see weakness, when the humans discover what we are because you could not let go of your dead mother's fantasy, remember that I tried to stop this." Then he turned and walked out, the other two council members following, leaving only Voss standing near the doorway. He looked at Alexander with something that might have been respect. "I will do what I can to gather support," he said. "But Thorn is right about one thing. This will fracture us. The question is whether we fracture towards something better or break completely." After he left, the library fell silent, except for the sound of Mira's breathing, too loud, and she looked at Alexander standing by the table with Helena's journals spread out like evidence. "What did you just do?" she asked, and her voice shook. He sat down again, suddenly looking exhausted in a way she had not seen before, centuries of weight settling on his shoulders. "I chose," he said simply. "My mother spent her life trying to build bridges between our kinds, and died believing she failed. Helena spent her life in hiding, carrying the proof that she had not failed. You walked into my world singing the words they both believed in, and I had a choice. Walk away, like I have been walking away for 4 centuries, or finish what they started." He looked up at her and his eyes were dark and endless, and utterly certain. "I am tired of walking away," he said, "even if it costs me everything." Mira felt something shift in her chest, attraction mixed with terror, mixed with the weight of stepping into a story that had been waiting 200 years for someone to write the ending. The journals sat between them, Helena's handwriting documenting a love that had survived execution and exile and centuries of silence, and Mira thought about Nana singing her to sleep, about protection that meant dying alone to keep a secret safe, about finishing what brave people started, even when the cost was unbearable. "Okay," she said quietly. "Then we finish it. Together." And Alexander's smile, small and genuine and heartbreaking, made her understand for the first time why his mother had chosen treason over safety, why Helena had chosen exile over forgetting, why some things were worth burning the world down to protect. Alexander's phone started ringing around 4 in the afternoon and did not stop, the sound echoing through the mansion's marble hallways like an alarm Mira could not escape. And she sat in the library pretending to read Helena's journals while listening to his voice drift down from the second-floor study, sometimes sharp, sometimes weary, always controlled. She caught fragments through the old house's thin walls, council members calling to pledge support or withdraw it, allies demanding explanations, enemies smelling blood in the water, and once she heard him say in a voice so tired it made her chest ache, "I spent 400 years being the king they wanted. One weekend being the son my mother deserved will not kill me." The line went quiet after that, and Mira sat frozen, realizing he thought he was alone, that she had just heard something private and raw and entirely unguarded. She found him 2 hours later on the mansion's roof terrace, a space she had discovered by accident while exploring, accessed through a narrow door off the third-floor hallway. He stood at the iron railing looking out over Hartford as the sun dropped toward the horizon, November air cold enough to sting, the city spreading below in patterns of light and shadow. She had made tea in the kitchen, Earl Grey because that was what Nana always drank when she needed to think, and she brought 2 mugs even though she knew he could not drink it, the gesture mattering more than the practicality. He heard her coming, vampire senses, but did not turn until she was beside him holding out the mug. He took it with a small smile that looked surprised and sad at once. "I cannot drink this," he said. "I know," Mira answered, "but it is warm, and you are holding it, and sometimes that is enough." They stood in silence watching the sun turn the sky orange and pink and gold, the kind of sunset that felt like an apology from November for being so cold. And finally Alexander spoke without looking at her. "Thank you for staying," he said. "You could have left last night, should have left probably, but you stayed and that matters more than I know how to express." Mira set her mug on the railing. "Tell me about you," she said. "Not the king, not the 800-year-old vampire, just you. What do you do when you are not managing council crises or binding yourself to random waitresses?" Alexander laughed, short and surprised. I have not been asked that in longer than you have been alive, he said. I read mostly history, philosophy, occasionally terrible romance novels that I hide from Thorn because he would find it undignified. I collect books about places I have been and will never see the same way again. I stand on this terrace and watch the city change year by year, decade by decade, and try to remember what it felt like to be surprised by anything. He paused. What about you? Mira shrugged. I work, she said. I pay bills that are always larger than my paycheck. I visit Nana's grave on Sundays and tell her about my week, even though I know she is not listening. I had friends once before she got sick, but grief makes you boring, and people drift away when you stop being fun. So mostly I just survive. And sometimes surviving feels like enough, and sometimes it feels like I am wasting a life I never figured out how to actually live. Alexander turned to look at her finally, his dark eyes catching the sunset. I have ruled for 8 centuries, he said. I have forgotten how to be anything else. You remind me there are other ways to matter. Mira felt heat rise in her face that had nothing to do with the tea. I am not your redemption project, she said. No, Alexander answered. You are the reminder that redemption is possible. He was still holding the mug, steam rising between them, and the space on the terrace felt very small suddenly, charged with something Mira could not name, but recognized in the way his gaze held hers. You build walls to survive loss, he said quietly. Then the walls become the cage, and you forget there was ever anything outside them. Mira reached out without thinking and took his free hand, laced her fingers through his, felt the cold of his skin against her warmth. His hand tightened around hers, just slightly, and they stood like that while the sun finished setting and Hartford's lights began to glow below, 2 people holding on to each other at the edge of a world that was fracturing around them, neither one willing to let go first. Mira could not sleep, too wired from the rooftop conversation and the weight of tomorrow's vote pressing against her thoughts. So at 2 in the morning, she gave up and started exploring the mansion's lower floors, following hallways that turned and doubled back like the house had been designed by someone who wanted to get lost. She found the training room by accident, following the sound of metal on metal down a stone staircase into a basement that smelled like sweat and old leather. The room was bare stone walls and harsh fluorescent lighting, practice weapons mounted on racks, a heavy bag hanging in one corner, and Alexander in the center with his shirt off, moving through sword forms with an antique blade that caught the light like water. Mira stopped in the doorway and forgot how to breathe because he was beautiful in a way that hurt, all lean muscle and pale skin. Scars she had not expected crossing his ribs and shoulder, moving with a precision that came from centuries of practice. He knew she was there, had to know with vampire senses, but he did not stop, flowing from one form to the next, blades spinning and cutting air, utterly focused. Finally he lowered the sword and turned to face her. You should be resting, he said. Tomorrow will be difficult. Mira stepped into the room. Teach me something, she said. Alexander tilted his head, confused. She clarified. You said I am part of this now, that I invoked ancient laws and marked myself as Helena's heir. So teach me how to not be helpless, how to be something other than a liability you have to protect. He considered her for a long moment, then walked to the weapon rack and selected a knife, simple blade about 6 inches long, balanced for throwing or close work. He held it out to her handle first. Lesson 1, he said, never fight fair. If you are in a fight, you are already losing, so use every advantage, every dirty trick, everything that keeps you breathing one more second. Mira took the knife, felt the weight of it, and Alexander moved behind her, adjusting her grip, his hands cold against her wrists. Like this, he said, demonstrating a basic defensive stance. Expect them to be faster, stronger, better trained. Your advantage is that they will underestimate you because you are human, Because you are small, because you look soft. Use that. They sparred, if you could call it that, Alexander pulling his strikes so obviously that it would have been insulting if Mira had not understood he could kill her without thinking. And she was scrappy in a way that surprised them both. Growing up poor, teaching you how to protect yourself in ways self-defense classes never covered. She went low when he expected high, used her size to slip past his guard, managed to get the practice knife against his ribs once before he caught her wrist and twisted, gentle but implacable. They were inches apart, both breathing hard, her from exertion and him from habit, even though he did not need air, and the moment stretched taut between them. His eyes were so dark, pupils blown, and Mira felt heat pool low in her stomach, wanted to close the distance, wanted to see if his mouth was as cold as his hands. Alexander's grip on her wrist tightened fractionally, and she saw the same want in his face, hunger and restraint fighting each other. "Why hold back?" she said, meaning the sparring, meaning everything. "I am tougher than I look." "I know," Alexander said, voice rough. "That is the problem. You make me want to forget every reason I stayed distant, every lesson 8 centuries taught me about protecting yourself from loss." He released her wrist and stepped back, putting careful space between them. "Enough for tonight," he said, but the air in the training room had changed, charged with recognition, and when Mira left, he was still standing in the center of the floor, watching her go with an expression that looked like hunger and grief, tangled too tightly to separate. Mira woke to weak November sunlight, and the sense that something was wrong, the mansion too quiet in a way that felt deliberate. And when she checked her phone, it was 7 in the morning with no messages, no sounds from the hallways outside. She dressed quickly, jeans and a sweater from the overnight bag Alexander had sent someone to retrieve from her apartment, and went downstairs expecting to find him in the library or the kitchen. Instead, the main floor was empty, doors to the study closed, and when she stepped outside into the garden, the morning air hit her face cold and clean. The gardens were extensive, manicured hedges and gravel paths, a fountain in the center not running because of the season, and she was halfway to the back gate when 3 figures stepped out from behind the hedge line. Marcus she recognized from the parking lot, young and built like a fighter, and 2 others she did not know, all of them moving with that too smooth vampire grace. Marcus looked uncomfortable, would not meet her eyes. "We need you to come with us," he said. "Thorn wants to talk." Mira's pulse kicked into her throat and she looked back at the mansion, calculating distance, knowing she would never make it. "Where is Alexander?" she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Emergency council session," one of the other vampires said, a woman with short dark hair and cold eyes. Very convenient timing. They did not hurt her, just surrounded her and walked her to a black car idling at the garden gate, and Mira went because fighting 3 vampires was suicide, and because some part of her wanted to hear what Thorn had to say, wanted to understand what she had walked into. They drove for 15 minutes to the outskirts of Hartford, industrial area gone to rot, and pulled up outside St. Helena's Church, a Gothic ruin with shattered stained glass and graffiti covering the old stone. Marcus opened her door and gestured toward the entrance, still not meeting her eyes. Inside the church was colder than outside, November air cutting through broken windows, pigeons startled into flight from the rafters, and Thorn stood at the altar in an expensive coat, looking entirely out of place against the decay. He watched her walk down the center aisle, Marcus and the others staying near the door. "Miss Chen," he said, polite as a businessman. "Thank you for coming. I wanted to speak with you privately, away from the king's influence." Mira stopped in front of the altar, refusing to show fear even though her hands were shaking. "You kidnapped me," she said. "That is not the same as coming voluntarily." Thorn smiled, thin and cold. "Semantics," he said. "But I understand your distress, and I want to offer you something that will resolve the situation for everyone involved. Leave Hartford today, right now, and I will provide you with $500,000, enough to start over anywhere in the world." I will also guarantee that Alexander wins tonight's vote without bloodshed, that the council stays intact, that no one dies for this. Mira felt her chest tighten. And if I stay? Thorne's expression went hard. Then the vote fails, the council fractures, and we face civil war. Vampires will die, humans will be caught in the crossfire, and the king you seem to care for will spend the next century putting out fires he started by choosing sentiment over stability. He stepped closer. He is choosing you over his people, he said. How many will die for your stubborn heart, and can you live with that answer? Mira thought about Alexander on the rooftop, about the exhaustion in his voice when he said he was tired of walking away, about Helena's journals documenting a love worth dying for. Do you love him? Thorne asked quietly. Or do you love the story? There is a difference, and it will cost lives if you are wrong. Mira met his eyes and saw genuine fear there, not malice, but terror that his world was ending. He is not choosing me, she said. He is choosing what his mother believed in, what Helena died protecting. You cannot bribe that away, you cannot threaten it away, because it is not about me. It is about finishing something that should never have been stopped. Thorne's mask cracked, control fracturing. Then you have killed him, he said, voice shaking. You have killed us all, and I hope you remember this conversation when the bodies start piling up. He gestured to Marcus. Take her back, he said. Let her watch what she has done. Marcus moved forward, hesitated, and for a second Mira thought he might refuse, but then he took her arm gently and led her toward the door. Behind them, Thorne stood alone at the altar of a ruined church, looking like a man watching his world burn and knowing he could not stop it. Alexander came back to the mansion at 9 in the morning, expecting to find Mira in the library or the kitchen, maybe still sleeping in the guest room, and instead found emptiness that felt wrong, deliberate, the kind of silence that came before violence. He checked her room first, bed made, overnight bag still on the chair, then the library, the kitchen, the gardens, moving faster with each empty space, until he was standing in the main hall with his phone in his hand and a cold certainty settling in his chest that felt like 400 years of grief condensing into a single sharp point. Elder Voss arrived 20 minutes later without being summoned, walked through the front door like he owned it, and his first words were, Marcus told me where Thorne took her. The boy has a conscience after all, sai-san, which is going to get him killed, but at least he is using it. St. Helena's Church, the old one on the east side, abandoned since the 90s. Alexander did not rage, did not break anything, just went very still in a way that made Voss step back slightly. He made 3 phone calls, short and clipped, and within the hour had 6 loyal vampires assembled in the mansion's foyer, all of them armed in ways that would not be obvious to humans, but devastating to their own kind. They drove in 2 cars to the industrial wasteland where the church rotted, pulled up outside the Gothic ruin with its shattered windows and graffiti scars, and Alexander told them to wait. He would go in alone. One of them, a female vampire named Sarah, who had been loyal since the 1600s, started to protest, but Voss shook his head. Let him, he said quietly. This is not about force. Inside the church was cold and ruined, morning light slanting through broken stained glass to paint the floor in fragments of color, pigeons scattering from the rafters as Alexander walked down the center aisle. Thorne stood at the altar in his expensive coat looking like a priest about to deliver last rites, and Mira sat in the front pew flanked by 2 vampires Alexander did not recognize, Marcus standing slightly apart with guilt written all over his face. Alexander stopped 10 feet from the altar, hands loose at his sides, utterly controlled. Let her go, he said. Your quarrel is with me. Thorne smiled that cold smile. My quarrel is with your judgment, he said. Prove it is sound. Renounce the bond. Tell this human to leave Hartford and never return, and she walks free. Cling to sentiment. Refuse to see reason, and the council votes you out tonight. Either way you lose her, but one option preserves what we have built." Alexander looked at Mira and saw her shake her head slightly, saw the fear in her eyes mixed with something fiercer, determination maybe, or trust. He smiled, sad and certain and entirely at peace. "I have already lost too much to fear losing more," he said, and turned back to Thorn. "By my authority as Katerina Corvinus's heir, by the blood that carries her line, and the oaths that predate your counsel, I invoke blood sanctuary for Mira Chen." The words hung in the air like a bell rung, formal and absolute, and Alexander felt the magic of it settle into his bones, binding him to Mira in ways that went deeper than protection, older than law. It was the rite Helena had documented, the one used for permanent sanctuary when temporary protection was not enough, and it cost everything because it superseded the council's authority, which meant acknowledging he could not protect her through political means alone. Thorn went white. "You just gave up guaranteed power to protect one human," he said, voice shaking. "The council will vote tonight and you have tied your hands, agreed to step down if they demand it, all for a woman you met 2 days ago." Alexander did not look away from Mira. "Yes," he said simply. Mira stood up fast enough that the vampires flanking her startled, and she walked past Thorn, who was too shocked to stop her, went directly to Alexander and stood close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating off her skin. "I did not ask for a martyr," she said, and her voice was steady despite the fear he could smell on her. "I asked for a choice, for partnership, for something that does not require you to destroy yourself to save me." She turned to face Thorn, shoulders back, chin up, and Alexander felt something in his chest that might have been pride or love, or both tangled too tightly to separate. "You want proof he is fit to rule," she said to Thorn. "He just offered to sacrifice his throne for someone he met 36 hours ago, not because he is weak or compromised, but because he remembers what you all forgot. Power is supposed to protect, not just control. It is supposed to build bridges, not walls. His mother knew that, my grandmother knew that, and he is finally brave enough to finish what they started." Thorn's control cracked. "You are a human lecturing me about our laws," he said. "You know nothing about what we have survived, what we have built from the ashes of wars that predated your grandmother's grandmother." Mira smiled, sharp and certain. "I know what Helena documented in her journals," she said. "The old rites included a mechanism for council reform, a way to challenge laws that no longer served their purpose without destroying the structure entirely. If Alexander invokes blood sanctuary and 30% of the council supports him publicly, the vote tonight stops being about his rule and becomes a referendum on the old laws themselves. Your absolute ban can be challenged as unconstitutional under the codes that predate it." Thorn stared at her. "You read some journals and think you understand centuries of precedent," he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. The church door opened and Elder Voss stepped through, 3 other council members behind him, all of them older vampires who remembered the time before the ban. "You have 30%, Voss said calmly. "I counted. We are prepared to support the king's invocation of blood sanctuary and call for a formal review of the 1624 ban under the ancient constitutional framework." Thorn turned on them. "You would destroy everything we built," he said, and for the first time, Alexander heard desperation instead of anger. "If you restore the old laws, you open the door to chaos. Humans will demand entry to our world. Bonds will form that we cannot control, and the stability we have maintained for 4 centuries will shatter." Alexander stepped forward. "No," he said quietly. "We will finish what my mother started. We will build what she and Helena envisioned, a world where protection runs both ways and fear is not the only currency we trade in. It will be difficult. It will take decades, maybe centuries, but I spent 400 years afraid to honor her memory, and I am done being afraid." Thorn looked at him, at Mira, at Voss and the other council members, and something in his face crumbled. "You have won," he said finally. "I hope you are right, because if you are wrong, the cost will be measured in bodies, and I will make sure history remembers who paid it." Then he walked past them all toward the church door, shoulders straight but steps heavy, looking like a man leaving a funeral for a world he had loved and lost. The council convened at 8 that evening in the Covenant House's main hall, a room Alexander rarely used because it felt too much like a throne room, all dark oak panels and portraits of previous vampire kings staring down with severe expressions. The council members filed in wearing formal clothes, 26 vampires representing the major bloodlines and territories, and they took their seats around the long table while Alexander stood at the head. Mira sat in a chair against the wall, the first human ever allowed to observe a council session, and Alexander could feel the weight of that precedent pressing against centuries of tradition. Thorn sat at the far end of the table, face carefully blank, and Elder Voss sat to Alexander's right, a show of support that was not lost on anyone in the room. The vote was simple in structure, complex in implication. Uphold the 1624 ban on human-vampire bonds as absolute law, or acknowledge the constitutional validity of the ancient rites, and begin formal review of laws that might violate foundational codes. It was not about Alexander's rule anymore, though everyone knew a vote against him would be seen as a vote of no confidence, and the air in the room felt charged with history pivoting. Alexander stood and spoke for 5 minutes, no notes, holding Helena's journal like a talisman. He talked about his mother, about the night the old council executed her for believing vampires and humans could be more than predator and prey, about 400 years of trying to be the king they wanted instead of the son she deserved. He read Katerina's final journal entry, written the night before her execution in Helena's handwriting because his mother's hands had been shaking too badly to hold the pen steady. "I die for loving what was different from me," the entry said. "If my death buys anything, let it be this. May my son learn that fear makes tyrants and love makes kings." The room fell silent, the kind of silence that felt like the world holding its breath, and Alexander closed the journal. "I have spent 8 centuries learning that lesson," he said. "I am asking you to learn it with me, to choose connection over isolation, to restore laws that our ancestors built on hope instead of maintaining laws we built on fear." Thorn stood abruptly. "I call for the king's immediate abdication," he said. "He is compromised by personal attachment. He has violated protocol by invoking blood sanctuary without council approval, and he is unfit to lead us into whatever chaos he envisions." The room erupted in voices, some supporting Thorn, more opposing him, and Alexander stood silent, letting the storm break around him. Then Marcus stood, young vampire who had spent 2 centuries following orders, and the room went quiet. "I vote to restore the old laws," he said, voice steady, despite the fear Alexander could smell on him. "I have spent 200 years being told that humans are beneath us, that bonds are weakness, that the old ways were naive. But I watched the king invoke blood sanctuary, knowing it might cost him everything. And I watched a human woman walk into danger to defend principles she learned from journals written 400 years ago. If that is weakness, then I want no part of your strength." The silence that followed was absolute, and then another council member stood, an older vampire named Katerina who had been neutral until that moment. "I vote to restore the old laws," she said. Then another, and another, voices building like a wave breaking against centuries of precedent. Elder Voss stood last. "The old laws were not perfect," he said, "but they were built on connection, not isolation, on the belief that we are stronger when we build bridges instead of walls." "We forgot that," she remembered. He gestured to Mira. "I vote to restore the old laws." The final count was 19-7, and when the last vote was tallied, Alexander felt something in his chest crack open. 400 years of grief and guilt pouring out to leave space for something he had not felt since 1624. Hope. He looked at Mira and saw tears on her face, saw her smiling through them, And when he glanced at Thorn, the older vampire was staring at the table with an expression that looked like grief for a world he had tried to save and failed. "The ban is lifted," Voss said formally. "Bonds between vampires and humans are legal again under the constitutional framework of the ancient rites. All related laws are subject to formal review beginning next session." The council members began to file out, some stopping to clasp Alexander's shoulder in support, others leaving quickly with faces that promised this fight was not over. Marcus approached Mira, would not quite meet her eyes. "I am sorry for this morning," he said quietly. "I thought I was protecting the king from a mistake. I was wrong." Mira touched his arm gently. "You voted your conscience," she said. "That is never wrong." After everyone had gone except Voss, Alexander and Mira stood alone in the council chamber surrounded by portraits of dead kings. And Alexander felt the weight of what they had just done, settling like snow, quiet and transformative. "You did not need to save me," Mira said. "We saved each other," she continued. "That is what the right actually means, is it not? Partnership, not protection." Alexander nodded, throat tight. "My mother would have liked you," he said. "Helena too. They would have said you were exactly what this world needed." Mira stepped closer. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Alexander said, "we build what they dreamed of, and hope we are strong enough to finish it." Outside the windows, Hartford's lights glowed against the November dark, a city that had no idea its world had just shifted, and Alexander thought about his mother singing the night before her execution, about Helena writing down every word so it would not be forgotten, about the long, slow work of turning hope into reality. It would take time, would cost more than he wanted to calculate, but standing in a room that had just chosen courage over fear, with a human woman who carried 400 years of belief in her voice, he thought maybe, finally, they had a chance. The Covenant House emptied slowly after the vote, council members drifting away in clusters of conversation, some satisfied, others wary, the weight of what they had just done settling differently on each of them. Elder Voss escorted Thorn out with a hand on his shoulder, murmuring something about discussing his future role in a reformed council, and Thorn went without protest, looking older than his centuries, defeated in a way that made Mira feel something uncomfortably close to sympathy. Marcus left with Katerina, the two of them talking quietly about implementation timelines, and gradually the formal hall cleared until only Mira and Alexander remained, standing in the space where history had just pivoted, surrounded by portraits of dead kings who had never imagined this moment. They walked together to the library without discussing it, pulled by some unspoken agreement that this was where they needed to be, the room where Helena's journals had revealed the path forward. Alexander poured wine from a decanter on the side table, filled one glass for Mira, left his own empty as always, and they sat in leather chairs by the fireplace someone had lit earlier. The silence stretched comfortable and exhausted between them, firelight throwing shadows across ancient books, and Mira felt the adrenaline of the last 48 hours draining away to leave something calmer underneath, solid, like bedrock after a flood. "What happens now?" she asked finally, and her voice came out rougher than she intended, worn thin by too much emotion compressed into too little time. Alexander swirled the wine in her glass without drinking, watching the light catch in the liquid. "Now we figure out what a world with bridges instead of walls looks like," he said. "Together, if you will stay." Mira set down her glass and crossed the small space between their chairs, knelt in front of him so they were eye level, and kissed him before she could think better of it. His mouth was cold like the rest of him, but his lips were soft, hesitant, for half a second before he kissed her back, one hand coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that made her chest ache. It was tentative at first, testing, then deeper as she leaned into him and he pulled her closer, the kiss tasting like hope and fear, tangled too tightly to separate. When they broke apart, Mira was smiling through tears, she had not realized were falling. "I am not going anywhere," she said. "Someone has to make sure you do not turn into a tyrant." Alexander laughed, genuine and surprised and utterly unguarded. And Mira realized she had never heard him laugh before, had never seen his face open like that, without the weight of 8 centuries pressing against it. "That is the job description then," he said. "Royal conscience." "Something like that," Mira answered, and kissed him again because she could, because he was hers now in ways that went deeper than protection, because the world they had just broken open was terrifying and beautiful, and she wanted to face it with this man who had chosen courage over safety. They walked to the rooftop as dawn approached, Alexander warning her he could not stay long because sunrise hurt even weak November sunrise. But he wanted to see it with her, wanted to mark this moment with light instead of darkness. The terrace was freezing, frost forming on the iron railing, and Mira shivered in her borrowed sweater until Alexander wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his cold seeping into her warmth, but the contact mattering more than the temperature. The sky shifted from black to deep violet, stars fading as the eastern horizon began to glow pale gold, and below them Hartford woke up slowly, headlights starting to move through streets, lights clicking on in windows, the city beginning its Monday morning routine with no idea that its world had changed overnight. "Your mother would be proud," Mira said quietly, watching the light spread. Alexander tightened his arm around her. "She would like you," he said. "Helena would too. They would say you were exactly what this needed, someone stubborn enough to finish what they started." Mira's phone buzzed in her pocket and she pulled it out, saw a text from an unknown number. "The old laws wake old enemies," it read. "Congratulations, King. You have just painted a target on everything you love." She felt Alexander go still beside her, that absolute vampire stillness that meant something had shifted, and when she looked up at his face, it had gone carefully blank in the way that meant he was calculating threats and responses faster than she could follow. "What is it?" she asked, and he took the phone gently, read the message, and his jaw tightened. "The number belongs to a vampire elder I thought dead for a century," he said. "Casimir Dragomir. He opposed the original bonds, supported my mother's execution, disappeared after the ban was enacted. If he is alive and aware of what we just did, then we have a problem that will not wait politely for us to build our new world." Mira took a breath, felt fear spike through her exhaustion, then felt something else rise to meet it, fierce and certain, and entirely her own. "Good thing we are really good at breaking rules then," she said, and smiled at him, not afraid, not backing down. Alexander looked at her, this fragile, stubborn human who had walked into his dead life, singing his mother's words, and resurrected everything he thought lost, and felt something he had not felt in 847 years. Excited for tomorrow, for the fight ahead, for the chance to build instead of just survive. "I know this is crazy," Mira said. "I know it is fast, 48 hours from meeting you to upending vampire politics. But I have never been more sure of anything. I want to stay. I want to help you build what they dreamed of. I want whatever this is between us, even if I do not entirely understand it yet." Alexander touched her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. "I have had 800 years to know what I want," he said. "The moment you sang, I knew. But you are absolutely sure, because this life, I can protect you, but I cannot make it easy, and there will be threats like Casimir, enemies who see you as leverage or weakness, centuries of complications you did not ask for." Mira turned into his touch. "I did not ask for easy," she said. "I asked for real." "So we fight," she continued, "together. That is the whole point of the right, is it not? Partnership, protection that runs both ways, building something that lasts, because it is worth the cost." Alexander kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. "Good thing," he echoed. The sky had turned gold at the edges, Sunrise minutes away, and he stepped back reluctantly. I have to go inside, he said. But stay. Watch it for both of us. Mira caught his hand before he could leave. We will figure it out, she said. Casimir, the council, whatever comes next. We will figure it out because we have something they do not, something your mother and Helena proved works. We have hope. Alexander smiled, sad and certain, and entirely at peace. Yes, he said, we do. Then he was gone, slipping inside before the sun could break the horizon fully, and Mira stood alone on the rooftop watching Hartford wake up to a Monday that looked like every other Monday, but felt like the first day of something new. The threat from Casimir sat in her pocket like a promise of future storms, but she was not afraid, or rather she was afraid and ready anyway, because she had found family in a vampire king and a reformed council, purpose in being Helena's heir, and love in the most unexpected place. The sunrise painted the sky in shades of pink and orange and gold, and somewhere in the city her old life waited, the diner she would probably quit, the eviction notice that no longer mattered, the struggling existence she had thought was all she deserved. But here on a vampire king's rooftop with frost on the railing and a new world opening ahead, Mira felt something she had not felt since Nana died. Like she belonged somewhere, like she mattered in ways that went deeper than just surviving. The old laws had woken old enemies, but they had also woken old hopes, old dreams, old promises that 400 years of fear had not managed to kill. Katerina and Helena had started something worth dying for, and Mira and Alexander were going to finish it, together, whatever the cost. She turned back toward the mansion's door, ready to go inside, ready to start building, ready for whatever came next, because for the first time in 2 years, she was not facing it alone. The sunrise burned bright behind her, warming her back, and she carried that warmth inside like a talisman against the dark.